Okay, hello and welcome everyone. In this video, I'm going to talk about perfect competition. So I'm going to introduce our basic assumptions that we need for perfect competition. Then I'm going to talk about maximization, profit maximization from the perspective of an individual competitive firm. I'm going to talk about where that comes from. So perfect competition is going to require a collection of assumptions. Often in economics, we're not so good about stipulating the assumptions that we're making with any given model. One place where we are really good about this is thinking about perfect competition. It's instructive to think about the assumptions we have for perfect competition and then to test a given market by using these assumptions. You'll find most markets just aren't going to satisfy the requirement. And so as you'll notice, most markets are not perfectly competitive. Matter of fact, it's like really difficult to come up with something that's even minimally plausibly perfectly competitive. Doesn't mean it's a bad model. It's just sort of our benchmark. It's a comparison. And it's actually really going to convey quite a bit of insight because we can get outcomes that we can get situations where the perfect competition model gives us really good intuition, even though not all of these things might hold. So our assumptions for perfect competition, we have to have many buyers, many sellers, identical products. We have to have free entry and exit. We have to have complete information. And then I like to say we need to have zero transaction costs. Then as a result of these things, our market participants are price takers. Sometimes people like to add price takers as one of the key assumptions for perfect competition. That's fine. I like to think of it as a consequence of having these things. It's when we have many buyers, when we have many sellers, such that they're all insignificant relative to the size of the market. They're not able to influence the price by buying or selling a large quantity. We have identical products such that consumers can find a different seller that's selling the exact same thing so that any price differences have to be alleviated. We have free entry and exit. So with free entry, I mean like there's really low capital requirements. Like you could start this on your own pretty quickly. If so, then you've got free entry. But if you need a lot of factory space, if there's a large fixed cost with getting started, maybe there's not free entry. Complete information. Everybody has to know everything about the quality of the products, and any price differences have to be immediately. Everybody has to be immediately aware of them. And then you have to have zero transaction costs. Transaction costs are just a sort of catch-all that goes into like all the costs that consumers face or all the costs that are faced with a transaction. So this can be like the costs associated with like searching out and finding a different seller or going across town. Like we're assuming that you don't have to travel long distances to find another vendor, for instance. And we're assuming that there's not like really high shipping costs and stuff like that. So it's actually kind of a strong assumption. When you have all these things, then we have price takers. Matter of fact, like if you don't have identical products, it's very difficult to make the price taking assumption work, which is why I like having this as a consequence of these assumptions. But anyway, so we have consumers and producers. Everyone's taking the price as given, and then they're going to respond given whatever is the market price. So we can use these assumptions to evaluate a given market. So for instance, like a market that I think is plausibly perfectly competitive would be like the market for sweet corn. So there's many buyers of sweet corn. There's many sellers of sweet corn. The identical products is one where you might have a little pushback. You might say that sweet corn from one field is going to taste a little bit different than from another field. For all practical purposes, it's about as close as you're going to get, although that's certainly a place where you might take issue. Free entry and exit. Well, if we're just thinking about sweet corn at like a farmer's market, the entry requirement's pretty low. So you could do this like on your windowsill. You could grow sweet corn, right? So like anybody could enter. Now, if we're talking about like ordinary corn markets, now you have to have like, thousands of acres and under corn to be able to participate, and that's definitely going to be a barrier to entry. But if we're talking about farmers markets, like on a small scale, then there's probably free entry. Complete information. Again, if I'm talking about a farmer's market, it's pretty easy to go and compare prices from one vendor to another. Also, there's low transaction costs because I just go from, one table to another table, and that's not too costly. So as a consequence of those things, I think probably we have a price-taking situation at a farmer's market would be my guess, except to the extent that there might be some type of branding or reputation effects or something along those lines. Okay, so exactly what I just did, that's how you would use the assumptions to evaluate a given market. And you check and see. And the interesting thing to do then is think about like which of these assumptions would go awry for a particular market. Like with the sweet corn example, well, the place where it might kind of fall apart might be identical products, might be entry. if you need to have an entire field versus like on a small scale, like in your yard or in your windowsill. Another place where it might fall apart would be complete information and zero transaction costs if we weren't talking about at a farmer's market. We were talking about market for sweet corn more generally. Anyway, so under perfect competition, the firm is taking the prices given. It's going to maximize profit by changing its output to bring its marginal cost equal to price. Now, very often, right after teaching that competitive market involves everybody being price takers, sometimes people will say, to maximize profit, the firm will set price equal to marginal cost, which is completely can't happen because the firm's not setting price equal to marginal cost. The firm is setting marginal cost equal to price. Okay, so the firm's not able to control its price. It is able to control its marginal cost. Its marginal cost is a function of its output. What's marginal cost? Marginal cost is how total cost changes when you produce one more unit of output. So it's the incremental contribution to total cost of one additional unit sold. So where is the price coming from? Well, it's the interaction of demand and supply in the overall market for whatever is that product. So wherever demand is, wherever supply is, they cross. This generates the equilibrium price. You could think about what would happen if we had an increase in demand, a rightward shift of demand, or leftward shift of demand, or a rightward shift of supply, a leftward shift of supply. It's going to drive up or down this price. And this price is that price which any individual competitive firm is going to be taken as given. An individual firm is going to have a collection of cost curves. It's going to have its average total cost, which is always U-shaped. It's going to have average variable cost, which is always going to tend towards average total cost as output gets really large, because average total cost is the sum of average variable cost and average fixed cost. Average variable cost changes with output, can rise with output. Average fixed cost doesn't. Fixed cost doesn't change with output. Average fixed cost doesn't rise. Average fixed cost falls. Think of like a fixed cost of like 1,000. You produce 1 unit. Average fixed cost is 1,000 divided by 1, or 1,000. Suppose your fixed cost is 1,000 and you produce 1,000 units. Average fixed cost is 1,000 divided by 1,000, or it's 1. Right? It's going to crash down. Suppose you produce 1,000,000 units. Now you got something even smaller. So average fixed cost tends to 0, which means the difference between average total cost and average variable cost, which is average fixed cost, tends to 0 as well. So I have to draw these as getting close to each other. Marginal cost always crosses average variable cost and average total cost from below at their minimum. So I've got that happening. And that just happens as a result of our marginal reasoning. So remember, marginal reasoning relative to average. Suppose this is, think of like a softball player or a baseball player. Think about their batting average over a season. Okay, that's an average. How do we think about their batting average for a game? That's the marginal contribution, right? So they play another game. Their batting average could be above their season average. It'll bring up their average. So when marginal cost is above average cost rises. It's bringing average cost up. Okay? If their batting average for a given game is below their season average, it'll bring down their average. Sure enough, anywhere that marginal cost lies below the average is coming down, right? So when marginal cost is below average variable cost is going down. When marginal cost is below average total cost is coming down. And it crosses below at the minimum, right? All right, so what the firm's going to do, though, the competitive firm's going to do is it's going to look at this price, it's going to adjust its output to give whatever is necessary to make its marginal cost equal to that price. So marginal cost is a function of its output. The last thing I have on here I should explain, price is equal to marginal revenue is equal to D, demand. The individual competitive firm faces a horizontal demand curve. It's horizontal at the market price. This is indeed a demand curve. Demand curves give us a relationship between price and quantity, or quantity and price. So what this is telling us is, give me a price, I can give you the quantity. Sure enough, at any price, I'll give you a quantity, or give me a quantity, I'll give you a price. And it just turns out we have the same price for all those quantities, which tells us the firm can produce any quantity at that same price. That's weird, but that is exactly our perfect competition assumption of not being able to influence the market price. Also, price is equal to marginal revenue for our competitive market, because marginal revenue is how is total revenue changing when you produce one more unit. Right? Well, if you can only sell each unit at exactly the market price, then if I sell one more unit, marginal revenue is going to be exactly the market price. So anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it helps. Like, subscribe.